Bullies tore her sweater in PE. Seconds later, they were crawling for mercy. Kenna Valdez pulled her oversized cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she navigated the crowded hallways of Riverside High School. Her dark hair hung like a curtain around her face, and her slight frame seemed to disappear among the sea of students rushing to their next class. At 5 feet 3 inches, with a quiet demeanor that bordered on invisible, Kenna had perfected the art of blending into the background during her 3 months at this new school. She clutched her worn backpack straps and kept her eyes downcast, hoping to make it through another day without drawing attention. Moving to Colorado from her small hometown in New Mexico had been difficult enough without the constant reminder that she didn't belong. Her father's job transfer had uprooted her entire life, and starting over at a new school during the middle of the semester felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. The bell rang for 4th period, and Kenna hurried toward her locker. As she fumbled with the combination, she heard the familiar sound of expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Her stomach dropped. Well, 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 look what the desert wind blew in. Sloan Whitmore's voice carried that particular brand of cruelty that only came with years of privilege and unchecked confidence. The blonde stood nearly 6 inches taller than Kenna, her athletic build and perfectly styled hair making her the undisputed queen of Riverside High's social hierarchy. Kenna's hands trembled slightly as she tried to grab her gym clothes from her locker. She had learned quickly that engaging with Sloan only made things worse. The girl seemed to feed off reactions, and Kenna had no intention of giving her the satisfaction. "I'm talking to you, desert rat." Sloan stepped closer, flanked by her 2 constant companions, Presley Morris and Hadley Chen. Presley was a carbon copy of Sloan, with slightly darker hair and an equally cruel smile. Hadley remained quiet most of the time, but followed Sloan's lead without question, her presence adding an intimidating weight to the group. Kenna finally managed to extract her gym uniform and closed her locker with a soft click. She turned to leave, but Sloan's manicured hand shot out to block her path. "Did your family crawl over the border in that ratty sweater you're always wearing?" Sloan's voice was loud enough to attract attention from nearby students who slowed their pace to watch the entertainment unfold. Heat flooded Kenna's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get to class." "Oh, she speaks English after all," Presley snickered, earning approving looks from the growing audience. "I was starting to think she only knew how to say, 'Si, senor.'" Kenna's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. What they didn't know, what nobody at Riverside High knew, was that her father wasn't just any relocated worker. Miguel Valdez was a former Marine Corps martial arts instructor who had spent years training elite fighters before transitioning to private security consulting. And every evening since Kenna turned 13, he had passed those skills on to his daughter in their converted garage-turned-dojo. But Kenna had promised herself when they moved to Colorado that she would try to fit in, to be normal. Fighting back would only confirm their assumptions about her being different, dangerous, not one of them. So she swallowed her pride and tried to step around Sloan's outstretched arm. "Where do you think you're going?" Sloan grabbed the sleeve of Kenna's cardigan. "We're not done talking to you. Please let me go." Kenna's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was something in her tone that made Sloan's grip falter for just a moment. The moment passed quickly. Sloan's cruel smile returned full force, and she released Kenna with a dismissive shove. "Run along to gym class, little mouse. Try not to embarrass yourself too much." As Kenna hurried away, she could hear their laughter echoing down the hallway. Several students had recorded the encounter on their phones, no doubt already uploading it to social media with crude captions. The familiar burn of humiliation settled in her chest, but she pushed it down and focused on getting through the day. Physical education at Riverside High took place in a massive gymnasium that could easily accommodate 3 full basketball courts. Coach Williams, a former college football player with graying temples and a no-nonsense attitude, ran his classes with military precision. Unfortunately, his attention to athletic performance didn't extend to monitoring social dynamics among his students. Kenna changed quickly in the locker room, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Her gym uniform consisted of basic gray shorts and a faded blue t-shirt that had seen better days. As she emerged from the changing area, she spotted Jake Morrison stretching near the basketball hoops. Jake was one of the few students who had shown her any kindness since her arrival at Riverside High. He was captain of the wrestling team, with sandy brown hair and an easy smile that made him genuinely popular rather than feared like Sloane's crew. During their shared American literature class, he had offered to be her partner for a group project when no one else would volunteer. Their friendship was still new and fragile, but it represented a small beacon of hope in an otherwise hostile environment. "Hey, Kenna." Jake jogged over with his characteristic warm grin. "Ready to dominate some dodgeball?" She managed a small smile in return. "As ready as I'll ever be." Coach Williams blew his whistle, and the class gathered in the center of the gym. Today's activity was Capture the Flag, which meant splitting into two teams and engaging in strategic warfare across the gymnasium. Kenna found herself on Jake's team, which provided some comfort until she realized that Sloane, Presley, and Hadley were all on the opposing side. The game began with typical high school intensity. Students ran back and forth across the painted lines, attempting to grab the opposing team's flag while protecting their own. Kenna tried to stay near the back, avoiding direct confrontation while still participating enough to avoid Coach Williams' attention. Everything changed when Jake attempted to make a run for the opposing team's flag. Sloane intercepted him near the center line, and what should have been a simple tag turned into something more aggressive. She grabbed his shirt and yanked hard enough to make him stumble, then followed up with a sharp elbow to his ribs that the coach couldn't see from his position. "Watch where you're going, wrestler boy," Sloane hissed. Jake straightened up, his easygoing demeanor shifting slightly. "That was a cheap shot, Sloane. Prove it." She stepped closer, using her height advantage to intimidate him. Kenna felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched the confrontation unfold. She had managed to stay under the radar for months, but seeing Jake being targeted because of his association with her triggered something protective and dangerous in her chest. The game continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Sloane's team began playing more aggressively, particularly targeting Jake whenever possible. During one play, Presley deliberately tripped him as he ran past, sending him sprawling across the polished floor. When he got up with a scraped elbow, Coach Williams was conveniently looking the other way. "Oops," Presley said with mock innocence. "So clumsy." Kenna's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct her father had trained into her screamed for action, but she forced herself to remain still. Getting involved would only make things worse for both her and Jake. The breaking point came during the final minutes of class. Kenna had been attempting to stay near the sidelines when the opposing team's flag became available. In a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, she saw an opportunity and made a dash for it. Her speed surprised everyone, including herself, and she managed to grab the flag before anyone could react. She was halfway back to her team's territory when Sloane appeared in her path like a wall of blonde fury. "Not so fast, border hopper." Kenna tried to dodge around her, but Sloane was ready. Instead of attempting a legal tag, she grabbed the front of Kenna's oversized cardigan, the same one she wore every day like armor, and yanked with all her strength. The sound of tearing fabric echoed across the gymnasium like a gunshot. Kenna's cardigan, already worn thin from years of wear, split completely down the front. Buttons scattered across the floor like marbles, and the tear extended from the collar all the way to the hem. But it wasn't just the destruction of her clothing that shattered something inside Kenna. It was the sweater itself. hand-knitted by her grandmother before she passed away, one of the few tangible connections Kenna had to her family's heritage and the life she had left behind in New Mexico. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the echo of the coach's whistle, which had come too late to prevent what everyone had witnessed. Kenna stood frozen in the center of the court, her ruined cardigan hanging in tatters around her shoulders, the opposing team's flag still clutched in her trembling hand. Sloane's triumphant laughter cut through the silence like a blade. "Oops, guess you'll have to ask your mommy to knit you a new one." That's when something fundamental shifted inside Kenna Valdez. The quiet, invisible girl who had spent months swallowing her pride and accepting humiliation suddenly remembered exactly who she was underneath all that careful camouflage. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless training sessions. "Control your emotions, Mika. Channel them. Never fight in anger, but never be afraid to defend what matters." Kenna slowly set the flag down on the gymnasium floor. When she straightened up, something in her posture had changed completely. Her shoulders squared, her spine straightened, and her dark eyes held a cold fire that made several nearby students take an unconscious step backward. "You want to do this here?" Kenna's voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent gymnasium with perfect clarity. Sloane's laughter faltered slightly. She had expected tears, embarrassment, maybe an attempt to run away. She hadn't expected this calm, controlled response that seemed to carry an undercurrent of genuine danger. "Do what?" Sloane tried to maintain her commanding presence, but something about Kenna's transformation was unsettling. "Cry to the teacher. Run back to Mexico." "No." Kenna began walking toward her, each step measured and deliberate. "I want to finish what you started." The circle of students widened instinctively. Even Coach Williams seemed to sense that something had fundamentally changed in the dynamic, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Sloane was still taller, still stronger looking, still surrounded by her loyal followers. But for the first time since Kenna had arrived at Riverside High, she was the one who seemed uncertain. "You want to fight me?" Sloane's voice carried a note of disbelief. I want you to apologize." Kenna stopped just outside of arm's reach, her stance perfectly balanced. "To me, and to Jake, and to every other student you've bullied in this school." Presley snorted with laughter. "Are you insane? Sloane doesn't apologize to anyone, especially not some nobody transfer student. Then we have a problem." Kenna's voice remained perfectly calm. Sloane's face flushed with anger. In her world, respect came through intimidation, and allowing someone like Kenna to challenge her authority would destroy everything she had built. She stepped forward aggressively, intending to shove Kenna backward and reassert her dominance. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but seemed to stretch across eternity for everyone watching. As Sloane's hands moved toward her shoulders, Kenna shifted her weight slightly and caught Sloane's right wrist with her left hand. The movement was so smooth and natural that it looked almost choreographed. Before Sloane could react, Kenna had pivoted on her left foot and used Sloane's own momentum to send her stumbling forward. Sloane caught herself before falling, but her confident expression had been replaced by surprise and confusion. "What the hell was that?" "That was me being nice." Kenna's stance hadn't changed, but everyone could see that she was ready for whatever came next. "Walk away, Sloane. This doesn't have to get ugly." Instead of backing down, Sloane's humiliation fueled her anger. She came forward again, this time throwing a wild punch aimed at Kenna's face. Kenna moved like water, tilting her head just enough to let the punch sail past her ear. At the same time, she stepped forward and drove her elbow into Sloane's solar plexus with surgical precision. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was enough to double Sloane over and leave her gasping. Gasps echoed around the gymnasium. Several students had their phones out, recording what was quickly becoming the most dramatic confrontation in Riverside High's recent history. Presley and Hadley moved to flank Kenna, apparently thinking they could overwhelm her with numbers. They discovered quickly that this was a miscalculation. As Presley approached from the left, Kenna used a simple hip throw that sent the girl rolling across the polished floor. Hadley hesitated for a moment, which was all the opening Kenna needed to close the distance and apply a standing kimura that brought Hadley to her knees within seconds. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds. Sloane was still trying to catch her breath. Presley was sitting on the floor looking dazed, and Hadley was tapping frantically against Kenna's grip. Kenna released Hadley and stepped back, giving all three girls space to recover. She wasn't interested in causing serious harm. She just wanted to make a point. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Kenna said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent gymnasium. "But I'm done being your target. I'm done watching you hurt people who can't defend themselves, and I'm definitely done letting you disrespect my family and my heritage." Sloane struggled to her feet, her face red with exertion and humiliation. For a moment, it looked like she might try to continue the fight. But as she looked around the gymnasium and saw the expressions on her classmates' faces, surprise, respect, and in some cases fear, she seemed to realize that the social dynamics had shifted irrevocably. "This isn't over," Sloane said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Yes, it is." Kenna picked up the torn pieces of her cardigan from the floor. "Unless you want to keep testing whether I learned anything else from my family." Coach Williams finally found his voice and blew his whistle. "All right, everyone back to the locker rooms. Game's over." As the students began to disperse, many of them shot curious and respectful glances toward Kenna. The invisible girl who had spent months being the target of cruel jokes had just dismantled the school's most feared bullies without breaking a sweat. Jake approached her cautiously, his expression a mixture of amazement and concern. "Kenna, where did you learn to do that?" She managed a small smile as she gathered the remains of her grandmother's sweater. "My dad taught me a few things. I just never had a reason to use them before." "Are you okay? I mean, about your sweater?" Kenna looked down at the torn fabric in her hands. It hurt to lose something so precious, but she realized that Sloane had inadvertently given her something more valuable, the courage to stop hiding who she really was. "I will be," she said. The next few days at Riverside High were unlike anything Kenna had experienced since her arrival. Word of the gymnasium confrontation had spread through the school like wildfire, enhanced by cell phone videos that captured every moment of her methodical dismantling of Sloane's crew. The reaction was mixed, but largely positive. Students who had previously ignored her now nodded respectfully in the hallways. Some even approached her directly to express their admiration or to share their own stories of being bullied by Sloane's group. Sloane herself had become notably subdued. She still maintained her social circle, but the aggressive confidence that had made her so intimidating had been replaced by a more cautious approach to dealing with other students. She avoided Kenna entirely, though Kenna occasionally caught her staring with an expression that seemed equal parts resentment and grudging respect. The transformation wasn't without its complications. Some students seemed to expect Kenna to become some kind of vigilante, approaching her with requests to deal with their own bullying problems. She gently declined these requests, explaining that she wasn't interested in becoming the school's enforcer. "I just wanted to be left alone," she explained to Jake during lunch on Thursday. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." They were sitting at a table near the windows, and Kenna was wearing a new sweater her mother had bought to replace the destroyed cardigan. It was nice, but it lacked the emotional weight of her grandmother's handiwork. "You know what I think?" Jake said, unwrapping his sandwich. "I think you showed everyone that you don't have to accept being treated badly. That takes courage." Kenna considered this as she picked at her salad. "My dad always said that fighting should be the last resort, but that doesn't mean you should never fight at all." I guess I just reached my last resort. Well, I'm glad you did. Sloane had been targeting me more and more because we're friends. It's nice to be able to walk through the halls without worrying about what she's planning next. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sloane Whitmore approached their table with obvious reluctance, her usual entourage nowhere to be seen. "Can I talk to you?" she asked Kenna, her voice lacking its typical arrogance. Jake started to object, but Kenna held up a hand. "It's okay. What do you want, Sloane?" Sloane shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. I came to say..." She paused and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry about your sweater and about the other stuff." The apology was clearly difficult for her, but it seemed genuine. Kenna studied her face for a moment before responding. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because you were right. About me being a bully. About hurting people who couldn't defend themselves." Sloane's cheeks reddened with embarrassment. "My parents got called in for a meeting with the principal yesterday. Apparently, some of the videos from the gym got sent to the school board. They're talking about suspension if I don't change my behavior." Kenna nodded slowly. And because what you did in the gym wasn't just about fighting. You had me completely beat, but you didn't try to humiliate me. You could have really hurt me, but you didn't. You made your point and then you stopped." Sloane looked directly at Kenna for the first time. "I don't think I would have shown the same restraint." The admission hung in the air between them. Jake watched the exchange with fascination, clearly witnessing a side of Sloane that few people had ever seen. "I accept your apology," Kenna said finally. "But this can't happen again. Not to me, not to Jake, not to anyone else." "It won't," Sloane said quickly. "I promise." As Sloane walked away, Jake shook his head in amazement. "I never thought I'd see the day when Sloane Whitmore apologized to anyone." "People can change," Kenna said, though she kept her voice carefully neutral. "We'll see if she means it." The rest of the semester passed without major incident. Sloane kept her word about ending her bullying behavior, though she and Kenna never became friends. They maintained a respectful distance, acknowledging each other with nods when they passed in the hallways. More importantly, the overall atmosphere at Riverside High seemed to shift. Other students began standing up for themselves and their friends more readily, perhaps inspired by Kenna's example. The bystander culture that had allowed bullying to flourish began to erode as more people realized they had the power to intervene. Kenna's friendship with Jake deepened throughout the spring semester. What had started as a simple partnership in English class evolved into something more meaningful as they discovered shared interests in hiking, classic movies, and terrible puns. By May, it was clear to everyone that their relationship had moved beyond friendship, though they were both too shy to make it official. On the last day of school, Kenna found herself standing in the same hallway where Sloane had first confronted her months earlier. She was wearing a new cardigan, one that she had learned to knit herself with help from online tutorials and her mother's patient guidance. It wasn't identical to her grandmother's work, but it carried its own significance as a symbol of her ability to rebuild and move forward. Jake appeared beside her, carrying his backpack and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just finished his final exam. "Ready for summer?" he asked. "More than ready," Kenna replied. "Though I have to admit, this place grew on me. Even after everything that happened." Kenna considered the question carefully. The bullying had been genuinely traumatic, and losing her grandmother's sweater still hurt when she thought about it. But the experience had also taught her valuable lessons about standing up for herself and others. "Especially because of everything that happened," she said finally. "I learned that I don't have to choose between being kind and being strong. I can be both." As they walked toward the exit together, Kenna reflected on the transformation she had undergone during her first year at Riverside High. She had arrived as a quiet, invisible girl, trying desperately to fit in and avoid confrontation. She was leaving as someone who had found her voice and learned to use her strength in service of justice rather than revenge. The girl who had once hidden behind oversized sweaters and downcast eyes now walked with confidence, secure in the knowledge that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim, and that standing up for yourself doesn't require you to become the very thing you're fighting against. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "How did your last day go, Misha?" Kenna smiled as she typed her response. "I think you'd be proud of how I handled myself this year, Dad. Ready to show me some new techniques this summer?" His reply came quickly. "Always. But remember, the best victories are the ones that don't require fighting at all." As she and Jake stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine, Kenna carried with her the hard-won wisdom that strength without compassion is merely brutality, but compassion without strength often enables cruelty to flourish. Finding the balance between the two had been her greatest lesson at Riverside High, and one that would serve her well in whatever challenges awaited her in the future.